Awesome. Thank you, Melinda, and good morning, everyone. I had to check the time to see whether I should be saying good morning or good afternoon, so that's a sign. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Some new faces here. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Roy Magara. I'm an employment solicitor. I work for my own firm, which is Magara Law. We're based in Bicester, but we act for clients nationwide. And it is great to co-host and join with Bluestream People now, as it were, evolved, which is awesome, and deliver this, which actually, from my point of view, is very much a topical discussion. So thank you all for that. This is not going to be a lecture, so please chip in as and when you have something to say, whether in the chat or otherwise. Um, Managing and leading in difficult times. I think perhaps we can put the mustard, as it were, and get straight to the point. Let's be real for a few seconds. This affects everyone. I know that the primary focus is very much about leaders and managers. And yes, employers need to support their staff during this cost of living crisis, as well as the plethora of other issues going on. But staff also need to realize that their employers or managers are likely to have the same problems that they do too. So this ought to be very much an interactive session. It's not a lecture. There'll all be well be a dedicated live Q&A at the last section of the discussion. Please feel free to use the chat, raise your hand, unmute yourself, whatever the case may be for your comments, complaints, questions, thoughts, or otherwise. But during this particular talk, we'll kind of break down into a few sections. We'll look predominantly at the theme of how employers can support their staff during this cost of living crisis. And it's going to cover a number of things. The challenges that employees may be facing, why financial well-being matters and its effect on mental health. We'll be looking at how supporting employees can benefit your organization, flexibility and legal considerations, and things to consider if employees take second jobs. So let's dive straight in, shall we? Challenges employees may be facing. We've all got to appreciate that these times, well, most times are not necessarily always easy times. There's always something going on. But the current state of affairs brings a whole host of considerations. Burnout, for example, due to overwhelming workloads, sickness absences are through the roof, commuting costs, navigating second jobs, as I've highlighted, increase in mental health related issues, financial illiteracy, and personal things going on at home that others simply don't know about. So it would be great, I think, if we can just expand on a few of these themes that I've highlighted. And I think the first focus I'm going to go through is that one on financial strain, which, as any Tom, Dick, or Harry ought to know, that is going to have a knock-on effect on people's health and their ability to perform in their jobs. It's just as simple as that. If you're worried about your finances, you're going to be worried about your pay, you're going to be getting stressed out about that, you're going to have too much month left at the end of the money, as it were. And recent surveys had suggested that 1 in 5, so around 20.8% of employees felt that the current cost of living crisis has impacted their performance at work. That's quite high. For every 5 employees, at least one of them feels that the cost of living crisis impacted their performance at work. And almost 50% of employees stated that they felt financially worse off. So 1 in 2 of your employees feel like they're financially worse off at the moment. And coincidentally, almost all were concerned about the living crisis. And 2/3, so I know I'm throwing loads of stats at you, but the reason I'm doing that is just to show that there's a significantly high proportion of employees out there who are struggling to make ends meet, and that means stress is a constant factor. I'm going to throw out a question.
Can I just throw a quick question back at you, Roy? Those stats that you just gave us, which were, wow, mind-blowing. Where did you get those stats from?
They're from a 2023 employee benefits and workplace satisfaction survey.
Mhm.
I will send over a link after the session, and that can be circulated.
That'd be lovely.
If you
Just
so
so I
wish.
can.
Yeah.
I was trying to write down everything you were saying. I was like, oh no, that's horrible, and that then threw me because I was trying to write down the rest. So great, thank you, Roy.
23 employee benefits and workplace satisfaction survey, and I'll
Thank you.
share the link afterwards for everyone.
Thank you.
So, question time. Out of those 1,000 or so employees in a recent survey, how many of them agreed that money caused them stress? Feel free to put it in the chat or just shout out an answer. Out of 1,000 employees in a recent survey, how many of them agreed that money was a cause of stress?
About 90%.
Yeah. Yeah. 85, 90, something like that. It'd be really high, wouldn't it? Especially on the stats that you were just giving.
Yeah, quite right. I thought that too, but surprisingly, there was one that beat finances. According to this particular survey, it's 43%.
Oh.
Which is quite low, all things considered. However, this is linked because what beat it was stress. People were firstly most concerned about work, and work fed into being underpaid, feeling undervalued, stressed out about redundancies and where else going to go. And in second place, because they only had to pick one or the other, was money. So I agree with most people in terms of it ought to be much higher than the 43, but when you understand the context within what was on top,
it's interesting. It's interesting, Roy, because I've heard a fairly recent, but it probably wasn't 2023, but people would take a pay cut to work for a better boss. That's quite a common statistic as well.
Yeah. Actually, we had an incident recently whereby somebody who was on 31.5 got offered a job through us at 35, was really pleased, it was local. Then his boss went and offered him 44,500 to stay. And he said to me, I don't want to stay, but how can I tell my family I can't afford something because I've refused to do the job? And I've spoken to him since, and he said, I find it hard to be engaged because I don't want to be there, but I'm there for the money. And do you want somebody working for you who's not engaged? It doesn't always, it's not always the right thing to be giving them a pay increase.
Quite right. I mean, employers are in a real tricky spot because the reality is employers are people too. Retention already is a big issue generally. And sometimes it sounds awful to say, but it's almost sometimes better to keep an employee who's underperforming, but at least they're filling a seat and they're getting something done, than having no one there and struggling to pick up that particular work.
I agree.
Tough juggle.
20. What can I say?
Tracy, I'd be interested to know from you, particularly with your focus on HR. So in trying to understand why employees feel stressed, what factors make most employees unhappy at work? I know we've highlighted a few, but from your angle, what are you thinking?
Funnily enough, I was doing training yesterday on stress, so I find this quite very topical at the moment. And I think some of the employees that I was speaking to, it was the financial aspect that they needed to work more hours to get more money in, which then made them more stressed because then they weren't with their family members, and some of them didn't know how to release the stress, which then gave them more stress because they couldn't get rid of the stress, and just sometimes that word as well. So then it was having that huge impact on their mental well-being, and that's what I was talking about with them yesterday. But some of the things it can have that impact of, like Belinda was saying, are they engaged at work? So if they're working for someone who might not be that inspiring, might not be that engaging, that they think, actually, do you know what, I don't want to work for you anymore. You can give me £1 million and I'm not interested. And I've experienced that a couple of times with certain managers where they've said, oh yeah, but if I increase this, will you stay? And for that split second, my brain goes to me, I want to stay because I need the money because of the cost of living and everything else. But on the other hand, my mental health is declining because of you. So what's more important right now is actually, if I don't have my mental health, I can't look after the people that I'm looking after. And it was one of those catch-22 moments. And I'm very lucky with the people that I surrounded with that gave me that support. And I know that I'm very lucky. Not everybody has that opportunity with family and friends. So I was allowed to then really, in my brain, I was allowed to actually go, do you know what? Thank you, but no, thank you. And they still think to this day that it's not down to them, even though I have said to them, you added more stress onto me by asking me to do things, which is within my remit to do, but you were pushing me too far. And I did have the confidence to tell them, whereas a lot of people that I speak to, they don't have the confidence to tell their managers that they're not coping because they think then they're going to get fired and they can't afford to lose their jobs. So there's so many different remits, I think, for a lot of people that they don't want to speak up in case they lose their job, because some people's mentality of trying to go and get another job is really difficult in this marketplace at the moment. But other people may think, no, it's all right, I'll go out tomorrow, I'll get another job. So it's really looking at the individual to find out what's best for them. But as a leader or a manager, do people always have their best interests in mind, like what Belinda was just saying with that person, you know, offering another 10-15 grand onto somebody's salary? Did they actually take into account why they want to leave? Did they have that conversation? And that to me is the most important thing, is to have a conversation with someone to find out, is the reason that they're leaving valuable, that they're moving on to bigger and better things, whatever that looks like for them? Or is it that they want to move on because of you or the company values or something like that? And it's whether people feel confident enough to say that. So that was a long-winded way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's some great nuggets in there. I'll throw it out to everyone else in case you've got any other thoughts on the subject too, or in response to what Tracy said. David, I'll come to you first if there's anything else you want to express.
Yeah, I think well, I think what you said at the beginning is that money is always there. There's that thing which kind of connects everyone. There's you've got, it doesn't matter where you are on the tree, your outgoings will generally match your income, and people find that point. So I think it's good awareness to say that this doesn't just affect people on low incomes. It is, people are stressed, and I also agree with what Tracy said, is that, if your work is enjoyable, then that is, rather than adding to that stress, it's just, it's almost stress relief. I mean, in difficult times, people go to work actually because that's the less stressful place in their life. Is, I know it's predictable. Work is predictable. I come home and it's completely unpredictable. So there's, your work can be a tremendous rock in a troubled sea as well. So I think we've got to see the opportunity of work, helping people, consistency, and even with financial advice as well. Your colleagues might be the best people to help you with budgeting and hacks and tips and stuff like that. Is a great resource of help, rather than necessarily your partners and certainly your kids. They're not going to help you with that kind of stuff.
Quite right. Anyone else in the audience who may want to share anything at this point?
Even in chat. I think overall employees want to feel valued, that they're actually contributing to something, and listened to. I've had one candidate only this week saying to me that he's in a role. It's a startup. He appreciates that, but he's working 60 odd hours a week. He's told them in 2 reviews that he cannot manage his workload. He needs help. They said, well, we can't afford it. And then the next day handing him more work. He's not listened to. He says, I may as well talk to a brick wall. So, yeah, what can I say? But those kind of things are the things that are encouraging people to leave earlier than they should be. You know, the job's fine, company's fine. It's just that the expectations are unrealistic. Yes, companies, in defense of companies, yes, it is tough. Their costs are going up, blah, 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 but there has to be a balance.
Yeah, quite right. And as you say, it's not easy. That there are two sides to a very odd dichotomy that you face. On the one hand, some employers are thinking, okay, I've got no choice but to give this to you, despite you saying you're struggling, because I've got my own things going on and I need to run this business and I've got higher costs. I want to hire someone, but I can't. Here you go. And the employee saying, hang on, stop giving me stuff because I'm really suffering under this burden. And indeed, something's got to give at some point. You're right. There's no easy answer. Thank you. Okay, let's transition a bit and let's talk about sickness absences for a moment. So I wonder, did people know that the latest stats show that the number of people on long-term sick leave in the UK reached a peak of 2.55 million people in April 2023. So to give you some context or some perspective on that, in 2019, it was 1.97 million people. There's quite a significant jump. To give you some more maths for those of you who are statistically minded, that I worked out was around 13% of the UK population, of the UK working population, I beg your pardon. So that's around 33
increase to
million.
13% or a 13% increase?
So the 2.55 million people who are currently on long-term sick leave represent 13% of the UK working population. That's quite significant. And that's just people on long-term. Indeed. And that's just people on long-term sick leave, never mind those who are on just sick leave for a couple of weeks or shorter stints of periods of time. It's a lot. I wonder, before I say any more, given those stats, what do people think employers can, if at all, do in response to those sorts of stats?
Occupational health.
Well, I think with what Belinda was saying earlier on, I think I was trying to say it, but obviously didn't get round to it, was saying about being listened to. And, you know, yes, long-term sick, if people are on long-term sick, how is that then managed? And for me, that's one of the biggest things for any sickness, is to see how is it managed and are we being listened to? Because sometimes when we get into the nitty-gritty with my HR hat on, I would be saying to people, have you done your return to work for the people that have got short-term sickness? But have you done a keeping in touch meeting with someone who's on long-term sickness? How are they doing? What's going on? Sharing, you know, how they're feeling. Do they want to invite them back in for any meetings that they might want to attend, depending on obviously what their illness is. If it's stress related and it's to do with work, then you might not want to invite them back in. But it's making sure that it's a very open book, that we have that communication flowing, and it is, for me, speaking to some employees, it's about being listened to, not from a HR perspective, but from that manager or that leader, that, you know, well, they don't really care about me as a person. They look at me as I'm a person on someone's books. Potentially, not saying all managers and leaders are like this, but potentially there are people that say that because they're not being listened to. What's the point? And I had an example quite a few years ago where a particular manager had someone who was on long-term sick, and their reaction every time they came to HR is, how can we get rid of them? I don't want them anymore. I don't want them coming back. How can we get rid of them? Because I need someone in. I need a body back in, because this is costing me a fortune and I don't need it. And I was horrified that someone could actually think like that, because I'm not that type of person. And we had several conversations about it before I suggested that they may have to go and speak to the director of HR, because his attitude actually really needed to change quite dramatically as a manager. So there then had to be a process put in place for maybe a performance issue himself because of the way he was treating a long-term sick person. Then demonstrated how was he treating the people that he did have within his team. And that for me was really, really important. And, you know, I couldn't have that on my conscience not to highlight that to the director of HR to go, this is unacceptable behaviour. How many other incidences has he had with short-term sickness within that team? So that's why I mean, for all the paperwork that sometimes we have to do for return to works or keeping in touch with people, it can feel like it's a bit frustrating, but there is a point to it. And sometimes people don't really see the advantage that it has when you're being actually listened to as an employee and as a manager and a leader, as a reputation. So that's my little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else got anything to say on the topic before we move on?
It's a really shocking stat, right? I mean, because 2.5 million people is about roughly the same as the number of people in the whole manufacturing sector.
Wow.
Because we represent about 11% of the population is in manufacturing. So that's kind of, I just think, well, you're like literally taking a sector out of the economy. I think what's worrying is that it's going up, and I was just, there are probably times in everyone's life and your whole career where you're going to hit a hard time, and you're really glad for an employee who stands by you through that time. But you would have thought you would then recover and be able to contribute to them. But if the number's going up, what does that tell you? Because the workforce is also shrinking from the top. So, are we not managing people as well? Has COVID made us, I think long COVID has had a factor. That's perhaps an anomaly, hasn't it? A lot of people with long COVID. But I don't. I'd be really interested to know what's behind that.
Be interesting to see the demographic behind that, the sectors, the age groups, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can try and do some further digging into that.
And just following on from what David was saying there, I've been on long-term sick. Some people know and some people don't know. My long-term sick was about 8 months. And when I came back in, obviously from a HR perspective, I was straight in there saying, right, I'm coming back on phase return. And so I was sort of dictating already to my managers going, that's what I'm going to do, because if you want me back fully, then that's what I need to do for my own health. And I did come back as phase return. Obviously COVID hit as well when I came back. But as I started to come back in as 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours, and then back on full time, as soon as I arrived back at my full-time position, the expectation was, well, you're all better now. So now what I need you to do is I need to go to Newcastle next week, and then I need you to go to Essex, and then I need you to go to Cambridge. And all of these things started firing off. How are you feeling about that? So they asked me the right question of how are you feeling about it? And again, because of how I was personally feeling, I was a bit like, well, can I go away and think about it? Because my confidence had started to decrease working for that company, I felt that I couldn't say to them, I don't want to go to Essex, I don't want to go to Cambridge, I don't want to go to Newcastle, my health isn't right at the moment. So I had to sort of really step back and think about, how do I say that to these people that have been really kind to me and letting me have this time off to get better, without throwing my toys out the pram. And that's how it felt. And it was really hard to go back to them and say, I'm going to have to say that I'm not ready, and I'm not one for saying no to things, but I'm not ready for this. And their reaction was great. I can't deny that. They came back and said, that's fine, Tracy. We'll leave it a month and see how you get on. And I was like, okay, maybe in a couple of months. When they said a month, I went, a couple of months, then I might be able to do one trip because my health isn't up to it yet. And And they were like, yeah, maybe a month and a half then. So they did try to a certain extent, but then I felt the pressure, because then they started to build the pressure on. And instead of it being a month and a half, it was probably about 2 weeks, to be fair, where they said, oh, we've put you down for such and such and you're going to Essex. Sorry. And all of those feelings of stress just all came up, and then my mental health started to deteriorate at that time. So I am going to be one of those statistics that then unfortunately had to leave the job, because I felt pressured into going places where my body physically couldn't get to at that time. And I knew that they couldn't wait for me to catch up, because they thought I was all better. I wasn't all better physically and mentally, and that really hurt to a lot of extent. So that's why sometimes with those statistics, with those long-term sick, it's then how do they return to work afterwards if they feel pressured to return, and how that comes about with managers and leaders.
Yeah, quite right. All really good points. The reality is it's a high stat, but each one of those people has a story to tell,
Absolutely.
much like yours. And the reality is returning to work doesn't mean, hey presto, I'm back at 100%, let's do this. Actually, there's still a journey to go in that respect as well.
Yeah, so there's that lack of support sometimes. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for that. So let's kind of steer the conversation a bit now, and let's talk about something which we've kind of hinted at actually throughout most of our discussions so far. And the one thing that I'd like to move on to is a discussion on mental health, and giving us a kind of soft transition from the cost of living crisis, which inevitably is going to give a rise to mental health issues. And I'll give a bit of a legal lecture. It's not going to be a very long one because I don't want anyone to fall asleep, but I will give a couple of highlights, which hopefully will be topical for everyone. And that is, a number of mental health issues are likely to fall under the definition of disability, under the main area that is often quoted in employment law, which is the Equality Act. So under the Act, employees have a right not to be subjected to less favourable treatment on the grounds of a number of protected characteristics, as they're called, but one of them topically being disability. And employers are obliged to make what are called reasonable adjustments in respect of an employee's disability. So for those rights to apply, organizations must have knowledge of the employee's disability. An employee can't just keep quiet about a mental health issue, which, unlike a physical one, may not be able to be seen or perceived. However, coincidentally, the legal position in respect of knowledge is not always well understood. So to build on that a little bit more, the Equality Act provides that there won't be discrimination arising from disability if an employer can show that it did not know and could not reasonably have been expected to know that the individual had a disability. However, a business can potentially be liable for disability-related discrimination where it can be inferred that they had constructive knowledge of the disability, even though they did not have actual knowledge of it. What on earth do I mean by that? So that kind of constructive knowledge is typically pertinent when we're talking about mental health issues, given that although we are talking more generally about mental health, not necessarily all employees are still talking about mental health. And their symptoms may not necessarily be immediately obvious. So line managers are often aware of symptoms sometimes of a particular employee's health issue, but may not be aware of the actual condition or the name of the condition, and therefore try and rely on this. And sometimes, not all, most employers are conscientious, but some employers deliberately avoid asking questions in a misguided attempt to avoid having the knowledge of the disability. So when something comes up or they dismiss the individual and then a claim is brought, it's, well, hey, I didn't know about that, or I didn't know about this, even though sometimes they're markers. So moving on from that, as the cost of living crisis continues, more employees are likely to experience financial difficulties, and those financial difficulties may affect their mental health. Financial difficulties might cause stress, which then links to anxiety or depression, both of which are typically well-known disabilities under the Equality Act. So the reality is those particular issues or conditions can have a knock-on effect on things such as attendance or performance at work, as we've all discussed. And if an employer has had some kind of implied knowledge of an employer's anxiety or depression, which has been linked to them being off or a decline in their performance at work, and then dismisses them or disciplines them because of either of those two things, an employer is potentially liable. It's a minefield in many respects. What can be done about that? My suggestion, at least in the first leg, is that it's really important for managers to be trained on this particular issue and to understand the importance of, Tracy, for example, you've highlighted, asking HR, feeding back to HR, dealing with return to work, having genuine and real conversations with their employees. If an employee says, actually, you know what, today's been quite a busy day and I'm feeling quite stressed about it, like, those sorts of words are markers of, okay, let's kind of pause work mode and then put my human hat on and sort of just say, appreciate it's been busy, we're all under stress right now, but just how are you? Tell me more about you, where you're at. Because the reality is, and I want to pass on to everyone at this point, we've all got something going on at home that someone doesn't know about. And that stress all can be huge, it can be small, but we all react to that differently. And we've all got to appreciate that we don't know those certain parts of our employees or indeed managers' lives. What do people think about some of the things that I've mentioned?
Well, one of the things that I've found, Roy, when you're talking about mental health, with some clients that I've been with recently and quite big clients, when I've said to them, for the employees as well as the managers, because, don't forget about the managers as well, what support have they got? Yes, they've got HR. Not everyone wants to go to HR, depending on how they are. Employee assistance program. Not everybody wants to go to them. But with a couple of these clients recently, I said to them, "Oh, you've got mental health first aiders," and the looks on everybody's faces, including managers, was, "Have we? How do you know that? You're external, but you know more than I do, and I work for the company." And then I'm telling them where they can find out in their company how many first aiders they've got and what actually that means, which was quite shocking for that large company that they didn't know. And so to try and explain to people what mental health first aiders are about, what they can do. So when you're discussing those disabilities, some of the managers and leaders could go to those first aiders and go, "Can I have a look at your manuals? Can you point me in the right directions of what best website to go to when I need to look at a particular condition, to if it's one of those people that really want to learn a little bit more about those disabilities." There are lots of training courses out there for line managers as well that focus around mental health. But as you say, with the cost of living or the financial crisis, some companies don't want to pay for that. So then you're in that sort of catch-22 moment of, well, what do I do? And it's trying to look at, for me personally, it's trying to look at what have you already got within the company that you can utilize if you can't attend any paid for training courses, for example. When you're looking at some of those disabilities that you're talking about there, Roy, what websites do you go to that are the valuable websites? For mental health, majority of people know go to Mind, because Mind for Mental Health is a fantastic website. There's so much information on there. But depending on that condition that someone's got, you might then want to go to Anxiety UK, for example, another great website. There's lots of different applications that you can get to get more information from people in a local format. I'm just going to give this out, so apologies if people have heard of this, but there's an application called the Hub of Hope. And the Hub of Hope was designed by a gentleman called Jake Mills. Jake had a series of mental illnesses throughout his life, and it was tipping over, unfortunately, to go towards suicide. Sorry to say that word at this time of the morning. Apologies for anyone if that offends anyone. But what he did was that when he got to that crisis point, was thankfully he turned his life around and he wanted to help other people. So he created this hub of hope. Now, this has now gone on leaps and bounds. And what he has got is a great business where they look at local amenities for people for a wide spectrum of conditions. And you don't have to pay for it. So you can just go on their Hub of Hope, download it to your phone. So you don't have to be a mental health first aider. You can be a manager, you can be a director of a company, and you can have that on your phone. And so then you can type in there, if you want Andy's Men Club, for example, that's up and down the country for men to go and talk about their feelings, then you can type that in there and it will tell you where the nearest one is. So there's things like that's out there, but you don't know what you don't know. And that for me is one of the important things out there. So sorry.
With regards to mental health first aid, of course, I'm going to, my husband suggested, shall we say, during COVID, that I did the course because I'm a half glass full person and he reckoned I was going to send somebody over the edge on my positivity. So I did it. I got to say, it was probably one of the best things I ever did. It certainly helped me an awful lot when talking to candidates. And it's given me the confidence to ask them, is everything all right? Before I didn't feel I could. So any manager, I reckon, should do a mental health first aid course. It would certainly enhance their ability to manage their team and help them look out for signs. End of plug, I'm going.
Those are really, really awesome points. I'll move you on both of those, particularly mental health first aid. I think, Tracy, you run a number of courses on that particular front, don't you?
Yes, I do. I do quite a few different ones. One of the ones that I'm looking to hopefully roll out soon, I'm just waiting for Mental Health First England to come back to me, but there will be a new one coming out for managers. However, if you are on the Mental Health First Aider, which is a 2-day course, but it can actually be spanned over 4 mornings or 4 afternoons, whatever you prefer, you can actually get a resource called the Line Managers Workbook as well. If you ask the person who's actually training it out, there is a workbook that you can get, and it's got lots of information from a manager's perspective as well. So that there are lots of different things out there, and there's lots of different mental health courses out there. I'm not just going to plug my own, obviously, because it's through Mental Health First Aid England. You can do it with anybody, but there's information out there. It's just going to the right people and to feel comfortable, because when you go on these sorts of sessions, they are going to talk about suicide, they are going to talk about depression, they'll talk about eating disorders, they'll talk about self-harm, and there's lots of subjects there that could bring or evoke feelings in yourself. But one of the things that any trainer will take you through is to make sure you're in the right space at every point throughout the training. And if you're not in the right space, it's not a problem. You can come back and revisit it. But it is really valuable. I found it really valuable when I first went on the training. So like Belinda said, I did it as a bit of a selfish thing. What can I do to support my family at the time? So that's why I did it as well. And then to know that I could then throw it out to everyone at work and then become an instructor was just fantastic, because now everybody that knows me knows that I love talking about mental health, because it's about people and I love people. So what can I do to support them?
One thing I would like to throw in there is the assumption, just like a first aid course, that you're supposed to fix the person with men. It's not a fix. It's the ability to listen and then maybe guide them in the right direction. So, for instance, Mind, Hub of Hope, you're not there to fix it. And I think that's very much a misconception of mental health first aider.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I think on that particular point, that definitely helped and helps me as well, because I'm a fixer. So, which is probably why I'm in employment law. Someone tells me a problem, I want to fix it.
Yeah.
But suffice to say that there are certain situations, and mental health in this topic is one of them, where it's not necessarily, oh yeah, you told me the problem, now I'm going to try and fix your mental health per se. What I found certainly in practice, and certainly COVID is a helpful marker because, well, it was so significant. But pre-COVID, yes, some would come and say, I've got this employment issue, I'm stressed, and you kind of think, okay, fine, we'll kind of get on with it in a sense with your case. But during and definitely post-COVID, almost every other person has something, anxiety, depression, and eating disorder, insomnia, you name it. And so much so that, much like some of you have highlighted, I also did a mental health awareness course because I came to find that I had a lot of assumptions or generalizations on mental health, from my upbringing or just otherwise. And just even things like, how do you communicate effectively with someone who has got a mental health issue, whatever the case may be, is really important. And the course really helped with that, understanding, interpreting, and communicating with people in that respect. Really, really important. Someone just mentioned in the chat, I want to echo how useful the mental health first aider training is. I did mine just a couple of weeks ago following a difficult and upsetting conversation I had with an employee, and I felt I didn't have the right tools to deal with that conversation. It covers active listening and lots of discussion of many different disorders. I'd 100% recommend it, not just for work, but just for your personal life too. Absolutely, because I think the reality is, mental health isn't strictly for the workplace, is it? We've all got, most likely, I should say, rather than we all have, we've all most likely got someone in our own personal lives, close or in a sufficient enough close nexus, who has something related to do with mental health. And it's so important to be able to try and deal with that as best as possible. You don't know what you don't know.
And you probably, like me, I think I had some misconceptions like you. Being a positive person, you think you're the normal one. Actually, there's no such thing as normal. We all got our quirks. And just because we have that quirks, it doesn't make us some kind of grotesque monster or an oddity. We just are who we are.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I very much am like you in that sense, but I think coupled with that, which is why I actually found the mental health course even more helpful, is even from a cultural point of view, sort of in Uganda, where my family are from, but in typical African cultures, mental health it doesn't exist. What do you need mental health? And that's what I came with through life, because that's just that was my upbringing. It was just all around me. So the reality of work and life actually, and this course really helped me understand that my normality or cultural normality isn't necessarily representative of reality objectively. Really important to humble oneself and realize these things and learn and grow.
Likewise, because I was brought up in the generation where you just shut up and get on with it. It's true that you dent. My leg's fallen off. So what? You can finish your job and then go after work.
I think of course the other benefit of getting more understanding is, being self-aware is the start of your journey to being other aware as well. So I think, part of it, at these courses, they teach you about, what's my mood at the moment? And you check in with yourself, because the team will know, the team will pick up how the boss is doing. You can't truly, button up this stuff. It is there. And I think when it comes to like this, it doesn't matter. The leader actually may be someone who is not the leader, someone who is the right person to deal with these things is actually someone from a different, they're not based on the organizational idea of leadership, but from people, they're a really good person to have in the company. And it's amazing how when you ask people what do they value in their colleagues, sometimes it is the quality they bring, the positivity, or the way they included people in the conversation. So I think it's a real opportunity to realize that businesses are actually quite complex as to where the help is, and that's good for us all to respect in the team. We have different strengths, and to recognize people for that. It's not always the genius business-minded person who is necessarily the best one to navigate people through anxiety, for example. It might be someone else who's a more junior person.
I like what Sally Ann said, that in her company it's wide, it's less than the stigma, it's in their emails. And I think that is one of the major issues, isn't it? It's a stigma. people being seen to talk to a mental health first aider in the company environment. It's how do we do that? Reduce the stigma. Maybe it's leave a mobile number and they're happy to be called and then meet outside or have a conversation rather than having to do the face-to-face thing. I don't know. I think this is quite a big question there, and especially in the larger organizations. How do we reduce the stigma?
But for me, it is talking about it very much throughout the company and getting that ethos to not having the strap line, it's okay not to be okay, but actually live and breathe that. So a lot of people like to have that as a strap line, but don't actually mean it. So it's actually showing more than just having strap lines. It's, you know, so what are you doing about it? Are you having support cafes? Are you, you know, having support for all the mental health first aiders that are in your company? Because if you've got someone who's coming to you as a first aider, where do you go after that event? If it's quite a traumatic experience that you don't want to show to that person what they're talking about, where do you go as a first aider? How do you release that without losing that confidence in somebody else? Because you can't obviously tell anybody what they've just said, but having that support mechanism for everybody and being open about it is absolutely important. And as you say, Belinda, it's what else can you do in your company to break down that stigma?
Yeah.
And some companies that I've worked for in a public sector, some of them it's stemmed from their CEO. So a CEO has done a video about their own mental health, and they've put it out on all of their intranet sites. So people will then know, oh, I didn't realise that so and so had that issue. Oh, well, that's different. So when they started then to promote things, it stemmed from the top down, that people then felt a little bit more comfortable to then go to a mental health first aider because the CEO had said it. And then a few months later, someone else, financial officer, had come on and done a video as well. So sometimes there's things that can, as David says, it can be someone who's in management, but equally it could be that person who, you know, in a company is the person to go to for all knowledge. They're the people, and you know who they are. If they start to can break down that stigma, it's huge. It's a huge plus point. But
like
as I say, go on.
Michaela's on about having a coffee morning. Sorry, I haven't got my glasses on. I should have brought them to this. Maybe when GDPR came in, we had every weekly meeting, we bantered on about GDPR and what they could do and what they just to keep reinforcing. Maybe it would be worth getting that incorporated into weekly catch-up meetings, or whenever you have your team meetings, to mention something, talk about it, reduce the stigma. I don't know, but I like the coffee morning idea.
Yeah.
How are we this morning? Shall we have a coffee, chat amongst ourselves?
And I like that there's a wellbeing forum as well,
Yeah.
which, you know, having people within the organisation, that's great.
Yeah, quite right. Lots of real nuggets there. Thank you, everyone. So let's move on slightly and just develop our understanding a bit more in terms of what are some of the bigger factors that have caused the cost of living crisis to increase so dramatically, or rather, I should say, living costs to increase so dramatically. One contributing factor is that at the moment, it might have gone up in the last hour or so, 54 minutes, is that inflation is currently at 8.7%. And fuel prices, while they've gone down in comparison to, say, a year ago, they're still significantly high. Meaning, particularly for those employees who are traveling to work, certainly by car, never mind train if their train strikes or otherwise, their costs are increasing because of inflation. Mortgage and rent rates have or will increase depending on where people sit on a variable or fixed rate or otherwise. But if you think about that as an example to the housing market, so higher interest rates means slower housing market, more people will be less willing to buy, for example, because they're concerned about mortgage rates, stamp duty, the list goes on, further expenditure, which means that those in that particular sector, estate agents or otherwise, are not going to be able to earn their expected salaries. So businesses will then have to make redundancies. in the housing sector, because redundancies are made or businesses might fail, domino effect. And that happens in all manner of different examples, but that's a very straightforward kind of example for the housing market. Furthermore, as we will likely all know, rising energy prices have caused very loud spoken panic among many employees. And although the government's cap promise had protected customers to a certain degree, I think it was in April this year when Ofgem, the industry regulator, had recalculated the price limits to reflect market prices and things went up. I mean, I know for our household, for example, gas and electric used to sit at, I think it was £90 or something a number of years ago, and now it's about 200 and something. And that's just a quick reflection of where things have gone in a very short amount of time. So the issues that we've got, despite inflation and living costs rising, many employees' wages are not increasing to reflect this because businesses simply can't afford it. And as businesses then struggle to cope with their own increased costs, employers must somehow consider alternative ways of supporting employees in this challenging time. Before we talk about how supporting employees can benefit an organization and the practical ways that employees can do that, does anyone have anything else to say on this before I move on? And it's fine if you don't. Awesome. I will move on. So, how supporting employees and what that means in terms of benefiting an organization is obvious, right? Employees who have minimal money worries, when they know what to do with it, know how to address it, they're less likely to suffer stress and anxiety owing to global financial climates. Employers, you're going to have your lower turnover, you're going to have increased trust, increased transparency, less sickness absences in the workplace. So let's kind of flip the script on this one here, I think. Let's answer this question instead. How can employers actually practically support employees in these difficult times? And I think the first thing is, as we've all expressed similarly about mental health, it's vital in my view for employers not to ignore the impact that the current economic time has on employees' finances. This does not only affect their ability to live their everyday lives, but it can also take a serious toll on their mental being, as we've discussed, and the domino effect that causes, not just on the employee, but business productivity as well. And I don't know about you guys, but I often hear what, in my opinion, may differ, and that's absolutely fine, but in my opinion, I think is unhelpful advice. Like, employers and managers, consider giving your employees a pay rise or benefits such as life insurance or contributions towards commuting. These are the same employers who are struggling to make ends meet themselves. So saying shell out more money when they're struggling to break even isn't necessarily, in my view, the right answer. I appreciate not all employers are struggling either. There are plenty of people who are riding the waves of the current climate who can afford to give higher wages, etc. But I'd rather us think about some more practical examples of how employers can genuinely help their staff's financial well-being. And one of those, and we've discussed things in past to do with mental health, but I think one of those on the financial well-being front is share some financial products or services, online budgeting tools. I know we've talked about mental health. We've talked about the Hub of Hope, for example, mental health first aid, mind, anxiety. There are plenty of mental health resources, mindfulness apps out there, general money management software, debt advice services, investment advice and management resources, automated money saving tools. Respectfully to the general population, we'll be very surprised how many people are actually financially literate. And I mean that with the greatest of respect, because we don't necessarily get taught lots of helpful stuff in school, but we don't really get told how to handle our money and become financially literate as a matter of course. So make it okay to talk about mental health, yeah, fine, but also make it okay, dare I say, to talk about money too, which can often be viewed as a taboo subject. But it means sometimes rather that people are left to suffer in silence. So if we can help staff know that talking about money isn't shameful, even if it's, yeah, my mental health, XYZ, but also I'm struggling with finances, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm waiting for you to give me a £500 bonus this month, but just talking about it allows the stigma to be removed and that taboo to lessen. What do people think about that?
I think that's a really important point, and like you say, it doesn't need to cost a lot of money, but just things like, facing up to, good debt and bad debt. It's like, who teaches you this thing? And I certainly know, like a credit card is a dangerous thing, and it can be a useful thing as well if you use it in the right place. So yeah, some of these things are, I don't know the best way to do it, but you're right. Schools won't be teaching it. And I know, for example, myself, I now pay my kind of cash account. I pay myself weekly. I never used to do that, but now with more money coming in, I'm actually moving to more weekly payments. So I know exactly that I'm not going to overspend the fritter away, because it's usually the miscellaneous expenditure which can just run away with itself. I've got to have that, and then you've got it, and your shopping basket's got a thing which it's not part of the budget, but I kind of need that. And it's that kind of mindful buying, which is something you've got to learn, you've got to practice, and but you do get better at it as well. It's like a skill which you get better at and is really useful. It's the difference between happiness and anxiety is if you learn to live within your means. It's really important skill to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, different people find you different things, but I often genuinely ponder and wonder when someone's saying to me, gosh, yeah, really struggling to make ends meet. But the other day I bought a new 2023 plate car. I'm like, right, okay, and it's this huge SUV thing. I'm thinking, okay, I mean, you do you, but that £400-500 you're paying out a month for that, in comparison to the much less you can pay per month if you want to do a PCP, for example, on a lesser version of what you've got. That's quite significant to your budget. But we live, and perhaps social media definitely doesn't help in this. I want it now. I've got to look flashy. I've got to look a certain way, society or culture, which unfortunately doesn't help and goes against financial literacy.
I think also companies, even the smaller ones, can look at their benefit offerings, and a lot of them have got the same benefit offerings they had before COVID. Gym membership, really, and maybe for one, a younger member of the team who has no family responsibilities and does go to the gym, that's great. But maybe more of a pick and mix, maybe childcare vouchers, because childcare is going through the roof. And we don't see childcare vouchers as an offering as often as we used to. So just more practical help. And, if you have an offering, maybe they can have a pick and mix of so many, or have the cash equivalent. Maybe for them, that would be a better offering, but you're not increasing your costs. And you may find you actually save money. And maybe even have a free pizza once a month to show them that you appreciate all their hard work and they haven't had a pay rise, but you appreciate them. And you never know, for one or two of those people, it might be the only meal they have that day. Mm-hmm. You'd be absolutely surprised at the people going to food banks now.
Yeah. And I'm just following on from that. I've done some training over the last few years around clients have asked me to come in and just do half an hour's training on financial awareness. And as you say, Roy, just to break down that bit of stigma, to say it's all right if you don't understand the world of how you're spending your money and facing up to some of that reality. And some people that came on those sessions were people that wanted to learn more for themselves on their budgeting, but also that they could then pass on to their kids, which I found quite fascinating because they're at school. Some of these people are at school, some of them were at college, some of them are at uni. And they said, some of these tools that you were talking about is fantastic. But again, if you've got a computer at home, if you've got a laptop at home. Some people that I was speaking to don't work using a laptop or a base unit at work. That's not what they do. They're very hands-on, so they don't have that, but they might have a mobile phone, so they can look at it on there, but then that affects their eyes, so then they've got to go to Specsavers or Boots Opticians or whoever. Then that's another cost, so I can't be bothered to do that, and then everything then stacks up. So to try and get that financial awareness, what this one particular company did wasn't just to get me in and do some training, but also they did that follow-up of, on their intranet site, was they had a page around financial awareness where all of these links were, so people could then log on to that, even just through their mobile phones, if they've got a mobile phone, of course. Those that didn't have mobile phones or access to a computer were still encouraged to come and use HRs or come and use their training departments or some of their managers to go and get that information. So there was still that support and to break down that stigma. So for that particular company that I'm thinking of right now, we're very gung-ho about, right, let's start this conversation, let's continue this conversation. So anybody that was doing any training, any meetings could actually highlight, have you looked at the mental health part of the intranet site? Have you looked at the financial awareness? There's some great books out there. Some people like to read books, so there's some great financial books out there for people that you can get on Kindles and all of that. And it was, again, just to raise that sort of awareness. Sorry, I was writing notes down earlier on when you were talking, so I'm just making sure that I've got them. And then some people had that sort of forum. So like someone else said earlier on with the mental health forum, that they would have a style of a forum or a cafe or a drop-in centre, which would be online, that people could then just drop in and say, look, you know what, I'm having a little bit of issue. I'm not quite sure. Do I go to Citizens Advice or do I go back to my bank on this? Because if it's affecting that person's mental health, for example, if somebody is on long-term sick, their partner is in hospital, may have cancer, and they may not be eligible for some of the plans that you can have as part of having cancer. And when you're going through some of these financial paperwork, when you're ill or one of your loved ones is ill, they don't want to go through 28, 36 pages of paperwork to then apply for something that they might not even get at the end of it. So it's then trying to find out what's the best way for that individual in the individual's issue that they've got, whether it's mental health, whether it is just the normality for that person and their family members. Equally, when I was doing some training with the NHS, some of those people, when I was talking about, you know, mental health awareness, having quality conversations, and financial awareness, just in the one session that we were discussing, and I was saying to them how many people are now going to those food banks that actually used to go to the food banks to give food and now going there to receive it, and the embarrassment that a lot of people have because of the stigma. Some people have their hoods up because they don't want anyone to recognize them. They may wear different clothes so people wouldn't know that they're going to that food bank. Knowing where those food banks are as well. Do they go out of the district to try and give their vouchers over? And some of you may have read people's stories on social media where I know for a fact someone had gone on there and said that they made sure all of their family ate, but they didn't. And like Belinda says, it might be one meal a day if they're lucky. They might have the leftovers that the kids have left over because they don't want to, oh no, daddy will eat later, mummy will eat later, whoever it is that's looking after them. And you only start to notice that when the weight starts to go, but only if they then start to dress slightly differently, because you may not know when they've got 3 layers on that they've actually lost quite a lot of weight unless you can see it on their face. So there's lots of those different things when it comes around to that financial awareness, is how do we see things with other people around us? How can we approach the subject? Everything all right? How are you doing? Do we want to make people feel embarrassed that they don't know what they're doing with their money, that they've got 3 credit cards and they're up to the hilt? You know, Some of us have been there, totally get that. I was never told about credit cards. I just thought, yeah, free money, love it. Store cards, brilliant. What's this APR lark? Don't understand that. I can get free money right now. And then my invoices, bills, whatever, they just went through the roof, and stupid amounts. And I was, what, 18, 19 years old. I wanted everything that everybody else has got. I didn't need it, but I wanted it all, and then was paying it off forever. So it's trying to get that in, as you say, Roy, with an early age, whereas we can't do that maybe from a school age, but what can we do in businesses to have those conversations?
One nugget I got from that is it's all very well providing the support, but making sure you continue with it. It's not just a one-off situation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And most people, when you say, how are you doing, will say, yeah, all fine, thanks.
Yeah.
What does that mean? That's just a robotic standard cultural answer back. There's so much behind that, yeah, I'm fine, thanks. That, as you say, Tracy, when you kind of dig under that, actually, I'm fine, is the furthest thing from the truth.
And I always follow that back up with, how are you really doing? And when you put that really in, then to a subconscious side of the brain then goes, oh, actually, someone's actually really interested in what I'm saying. So if there is something, then they can actually, hopefully, they can feel more comfortable. But again, it might not be in the right place to have that conversation. So you might say it in the middle of a corridor on passing, how are you doing? Because you might not go, you don't look all right. So, well, I can't really talk right now. Someone might not even say that. They might just go, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'll see you later. So it's choosing the moments when you're going to have those conversations, especially when it's to do with financial or about how much money they don't have, or they might have too much of. That'd be amazing, wouldn't it? Wonder how that feels.
They do talk about
that might be a nice problem to have.
Yeah.
Very much. And I think the additional point, I know we're talking a lot about HR supporting employees, supporting and training senior staff, providing these sorts of training to line managers, etc. But I think one stark reality is that HR are people too, and HR are going to need these sorts of services and help, etc. too. Which leads back to that initial point that I was highlighting, that staff typically have this, well, you're the manager, you should deal with it, or you're HR, you should deal with it, or you're untouchable, you're all fine. But actually, HR in the main are people too. And I think most people in HR will know that, particularly when you're dealing with people, you inevitably carry a lot of emotional weight and baggage from all the conversations, knowing that this person's got this, that person's got it, this person's dealing with this person's relying on you for that. That one's brought a disciplinary. That one's got a grievance against this person. That one's denying everything, and now that one's person's really stressed. That one's going to bring a counter, and you're juggling this whole weight, and somehow you still got to smile. You still got to get your shoulders back and get everything together and carry on. HR people too, and HR need that support as well.
Absolutely.
Really important for business. HR need HR, as it were, and support as well. All right, awesome. I think we've covered some really good ground. I'm conscious of time, so I want to pick up on one thing which is becoming more prevalent, and that is the reality of a lot of people getting second or third jobs in many respects just to make ends meet. Some people have strong views as to whether they are for or against them for different reasons. The reality is it's almost becoming a norm. I had a conversation with a client yesterday who was actually coming from a place of concern for a particular employee who the client said, all right, we've got an employee and the employee is working with us sort of 9 till 5:30, but we know that this employee has got 2 other jobs. One, we've actually noticed her doing it, answering calls for this other company during work time, which is an issue in and of itself to deal with. But also, this employee also is doing a night shift as well, from 6 till 11. And you think, okay, like that's a lot. But that's a reality, and some people will go past 11 into the night, and then they're back up again, and then they get into work the next day, and that's just the reality. Now, I suppose maybe a bit more from a legal angle, many employers include a provision in the contracts of employment as a matter of course prohibiting employees from working for other companies during their term of employment. And but with more people opting or thinking about taking a second or indeed a third job, how do employers tackle that? If employee contracts include a restriction, for example, on taking up other work, can employers take a view in terms of loosening that prescription on a temporary basis? I appreciate that employers may not be so keen for their employees to work for competitors. I'm not necessarily suggesting that either for obvious reasons, but it might be the case that an employee may be able to do something completely different, or that is not a threat to a business's legitimate interests that they can do. But of course, an employer's got to consider other things like working time regulations. As this employee said, I don't want to work over 48 hours a week. But if they did take the second or third job, they will do. They're going to have to make sure that gets waived and in writing and deal with that whole legal process. Because if they don't, everyone's going to be in trouble for that. But also, it's the straightforward mental health of that employee. People need to sleep. Okay, people need to eat and earn money too. But if you've got an employee who's not sleeping well, that's just a straight fire road to burnout. So again, employers have this difficult juggling act here when their employee comes and says, listen, I'm here, I want to do my work, but actually I've got this clause in my employment contract. Let's talk and work through this. And I want to kind of open up the discussion to any of you in terms of your thoughts on anything that's been mentioned or otherwise.
Well, no, I've been talking a lot, so I thought I'd better go quiet for a minute. I'm happy to go quiet. If anyone else wants to
While
speak.
people are thinking.
It is a tough one because if you've got an employee working a second job, that they're only human. And if it's not burnout, they'll just make themselves ill or something.
Yeah.
And how can they concentrate well on their job? There needs to be finding a balance, really, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Maybe
and
talking to them about financial support and their well-being and seeing if there's other things they can do so that they have a bit more free time with their families.
Yeah.
But there's also everything in between. I think, I mean, I've worn many hats for all my working life. I've always had a hustle going on somewhere. And, it's not been a full-time job, but it's been something. And I think I would say it's just a view, but I would say it's a bit, in my mind, I think it's probably only going to backfire to restrain people from doing what is becoming the future of work, where people do have multiple income streams, even if it's not a 9 to 5. So I would say, the writing's on the wall that there will be more of that. So perhaps it's better, rather than having a contract you cannot do it, more like what's a sensible level to have, and keep an open dialogue, because what you don't want is people not declaring it and secretly doing a night shift, for example, and you are experiencing it'd be much better if they told you about that, rather than saying I'm going to get fired if I speak up about this. So it's better to be open about stuff.
Question, Roy, if it's not in their employment contract, are they legally obliged to tell you they have a second job?
No. I mean, most employment contracts will say, of course, while you're contracted for us, you dedicate your full time to us, and that's normal and that's absolutely fine, even if it isn't in the employment contract. Yeah. But what an employee does outside their contractual hours is, in many ways, none of the employer's business.
Yeah.
There may be they may need to tell for the tax code perspective, isn't that right? They may need to tell payroll.
Well, not really, because you declare your second job as your second job, so that the increased tax goes on that one as opposed to your.
Yeah, you'll get the emergency tax, which is BR rate on the second job. So.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's one of my someone I used to work with. They were very excited when they got a second job. I mean, I don't know why she would get excited, but she was very excited about having this second job. And my instant reaction was, you do a full-time position now. This is another part-time but full-time position, because she's doing it every weekend. So it was full on, very physical job, and she was getting tired. She was getting tired before this, and now she's going to be even more tireder, not even really a word. But I was concerned about her well-being, and I said to her, what does the company feel, this, that and the other, and are they having, again, regular reviews with you to see how you're doing? Because again, that for me is really important, because somebody else I knew that had two jobs, their work suffered in their main job, and they made huge mistakes, and they worked in finance. And so they made some really, really bad mistakes to do with money, which had a huge knock-on effect for some of the clients. So it was, they needed to address that, obviously, which then made that person feel awful because they'd made that mistake, but they were tired, they were drained. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we need to review how many hours you do in your other line of work, if you know, or what can we do to support you? So having that open discussion on a regular basis was really helpful then for that person, because they weren't sleeping, because they know that they then made a muck up in their current job because of the new job that they were making, and then trying to make a new impression in their new job, just for those extra bits of money that they're then going to be taxed on.
And that's worth talking about, the tax element. You know, if it takes, we've been discussing with somebody, and I did some calculations, for an extra £2,500 a year, it was only taking home £87 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the tax implication. So if you know you're going to earn so much, are you going to take yourself over a tax threshold?
Yeah.
You know, and is there a way that you could look at giving somebody a couple of extra hours with you, rather than bringing on a new employee? You know, I think, and also I think sometimes employees don't realise about the tax implication, or perhaps even if they've got a young family at home and their partner's not working, do they know that they can use their tax code? There's
Mm-hmm.
lots of things that we can make them aware of, that maybe
Absolutely.
they don't need the second job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Give them their
Right,
lives back.
Someone's typing something, so while we wait for that to come through, if it does, that in the main, I'm conscious of time as we're looking to close, are some of the things that I wanted to share with everyone on this rather topical topic, as it were. Someone's just said, we all ask new hires along with contract offer to list any other employment held, direct or indirect, paid or otherwise. Yeah, that's helpful to note. I'd anticipate for most employers, not only from a mental health point of view and well-being, as we've discussed, but also just to make sure that there aren't any competitive issues that might be going on in the background, and you'd be amazed what people do sometimes. So that, in my view, is completely fair question to ask. Belinda, I'll hand back over to you at this point as far as any closing or other Q&A you might want to do.
No, thank you, Roy. I really appreciate that. And Tracy, for your input, and David and everybody else. Thanks for joining us on this webinar. I really appreciate it. Just to update you on Bluestream People, as we are now, I must learn to say that, not the reason we did this, like 18 months ago, we incorporated HR because we support a lot of growing companies, and obviously, for obvious reasons, they need HR. But like a lot of companies, they tend to wait until they've got a problem before they do it. So now we're trying to help them along. But also David here has joined us, a part of the team. We found just before COVID, a few candidates coming back to us. They were being promoted really quickly, and although they had a technical ability, they didn't have a clue when it came to managing people or a team or even a project. So David's on board, and he can make them accountable by coaching them rather than putting on a training course. You do a training course, they tick all the boxes, they do great, they leave the course and that's forgotten about. So David makes sure they follow through, and you can keep your employees. So that's what we're all about. If you need anything from us, any questions on today, please just drop me an email. It's belinda@bluestreampeople.co.uk, but I will email you out this recording once we've ended, and anything that Roy sends along to me, I will forward on. And thank you for joining us. Any questions before we go? Sally Ann is typing. Thank you, Sally.
You're welcome.
Thank you for everybody else. I'm going to
Yeah,
stop.
thanks so much, Rise. Really, I feel like we're sort of touching the tip of an iceberg, but still, you know, better that we talk. And you know, I've certainly learned a whole load of things today about, you know, like the number of ways you can support employees, and that's great. You know, just to, even if it's conscious incompetence, we at least know what we need to do some homework on. That's great.
Thank you,
Likewise.
Roy.
As soon as I've got the dates on the mental health first aider course, I'll send it out to you too, just in case you've got anybody who might be interested in doing it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, too.
Thank
Real
you.
nuggets have been shared.
Thank you once again.
Okay, people. See you soon.
Okay. See you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.